Gim Huay, what a pleasure to see you here.
Nice to meet you, Wei.
Talking about climate change, this time the forum focusing on pragmatic efforts, building alliance, for example. How is the business community respond to this?
The business community has evolved significantly and in a very positive way over the last few years, right? And we've seen that shift from the commitments over the last years around net zero, right? How they can transit towards more sustainable development, right? And now they are all trying to see how they can find solutions to translate the ambition, the commitments into practical action, working with governments as well as with each other across supply chains and with their consumers and the civil society. So I would say that we're seeing a lot of positive progress in the space, and hopefully we can see an escalation of efforts as the next years move forward, as we move forward on the agenda.
Global companies, including China-based global companies, have been making efforts on some of the major commodities in terms of supply chain, make sure it is meeting up to the real good standards. So how will that alliance, for example, involving China's Gim Huay Neo and some of the others, be able to showcase, and what are the benchmarks that are likely to be re-examined later to see whether this is a successful case study?
Yeah, you mentioned Gim Huay Neo, and Gim Huay Neo actually is in a very important sector, food and land use, which accounts for close to 30% of global emissions. And really where players like Gim Huay Neo will be able to play a very important role is how they can work with their suppliers to drive green supply chains. And earlier this year, Gim Huay Neo actually made a commitment to procure deforestation-free products over the next few years, and I think this will have a very significant leadership effect and across their suppliers, the suppliers of their suppliers, right, and in turn translate a lot of these benefits to consumers and to the broader society. So that is a very, very positive effort by Gim Huay Neo and many of the other players in the space who are also taking a leadership role in mobilizing their suppliers and working closely with government to support this transition.
Assessing the result is the key, isn't it? Yes. Now, there are lack of international governance so far regarding standards and many other issues. So how would the forum work with the business community, be able to work out at least some of the details to connect the dots?
We are all feeling the stones as we cross the river. The standards are evolving and will need to continue to evolve. And this is where business action is important, right? So I'll give you an example. The Task Force for Nature-Related Disclosures, TNFD, have come up with their standards, but it's a beta version. And they are actually reaching out to businesses to say, can you please try these standards and give me feedback? What works, what's practical, and how do we actually continue to refine and enhance the standards? So what I would say is that where business is let's not make perfection be the enemy of good, right? Let's get going. Let's continue to improve, enhance, working in partnership to move towards a sustainable future.
One of the things is the urgency of climate change, and that impact has been felt all over the world throughout the years, as we all know. The other thing is lack of infrastructure, lack of platforms, lack of real international governance systems regarding all of the standards to all the different things on the chain. So how do you see this actually apparent conflict, a paradox in a way?
So a platform like the World Economic Forum is intended to serve this purpose, right? How do we actually bring different stakeholders together, right? Have conversations, dialogues, exchange of perspectives, best practices, so that we can resolve some of these tensions and potential conflicts, as you call it, right? But I'll see is actually more opportunity for dialogue and collaboration.
Earlier during the COP meetings, you are very experienced in that. You are an expert in the field. You've been following and participating actively in that process. You know how difficult it is. Every time, every year, the meeting usually extended beyond the deadlines. Only then can any agreement be reached to a little bit more extent. So that's only one of the realities. But now things are getting even more complex with coupled up with geopolitics and the economic impacts of the pandemic and so on. So how do you see more complexity these days? Is this going to be both challenges and opportunity at the same time? Because sometimes for geopolitical cooperation, big powers also need topics like climate change and many other global issues to work on together.
So the recognition that the global leaders will and have started to embrace is that the environment issue is a global issue, and there is no way we can address this issue on our own. We have to work together, and there's also no way we can protect ourselves from the forces of nature. So that hopefully is the common platform and the common objective that we work together on, right? And rise above, and let's hopefully rise above the differences, right? To find a common path forward, bearing in mind that every country has its own unique realities that they have to deal with, right? But if we can forge that consensus, right, it will also help support the global movement. One of the key developments over the years is the stronger voices of business and civil society in the COP negotiations. And that has actually provided a very positive driving force, because it has actually allowed for that global unity and also provided more political will to be bolder in how we think about the solution space, right? Instead of thinking about a 30-year time horizon, can we think about the concrete steps we can take over the next 5 years, and ideally even tomorrow, right, or today, right? Things that we can all do as individuals, as societies, as businesses and governments to actually rise up to the crisis. It's going to be a humanitarian crisis if we don't act fast enough, right? And environmental issues are closely intertwined with food and water security issues, public health, and social resilience concerns.
Everything
is interconnected. Exactly.
Funding is a big issue. We remember very well earlier commitment made by the G20 summit actually have not been realized, particularly by the developed economies. That number is still not being provided, even though it is quite a small number. So given that as a precedence, how can platforms like the forum be able to bring more confidence to this overall process?
I like to use the word investment opportunity rather than a funding gap, because the idea of the fact that it is a business opportunity suggests that it actually can help create new markets for the future, and this is where we should be headed, right? And when you think about the climate crisis, you're really thinking about transitions across food and land use, across the built urban environment, across energy and extractives. And if you look across at all three areas, there are a lot of opportunities for investing into these areas. It's true that we probably need to catalyze these transition efforts, and these catalytic forces could come from policy support. It could come from some catalytic grants or capital coming from philanthropy, development grants, but really we need to think about what are the new business models and investment opportunities that can actually help us build this new, what I'll call the new nature economy of the future.
I also want to ask you about developing countries and developing economies. China is the largest in the world. We have seen this country, together with many others, are testing ideas and implementing those ideas. Solar and wind power, for example, not to mention the solar panels now around the world. So it's being estimated that the amount here using solar and also wind power probably double all the others elsewhere in the world. That's quite amazing. Having said that though, how much will this make a difference given China's 30-60 agenda?
So one of the reasons why the cost of solar has come down so much is because of the Chinese market, right? So by virtue of the size of this economy, right, the entrepreneurial power of the people, right? I think China will have a very critical role in actually driving technological innovations for the future, right? Solar is one example. I can think of many other examples. So water is another area. There is also the whole area around material innovation. What are the new materials of the future that again will support cost efficiencies, but at the same time also friendly to the environment, right? There are also infrastructural support and even green finance instruments that could potentially be piloted in this economy and also applied to many parts of the world.
Concerns of developing economies, one of those is whether taxes, trade policies regarding green development will be used as a quote-unquote weapon or tools from one economy, from some economy against the other economies. So this is part of the global governance issue, of course. But as we do not have yet a widely accepted standard about all of these, how can we, during the process of building this, to avoid these pitfalls, to put off the fire before it gets big?
Yes. That's a very good point. I think over the years, a lot of countries and jurisdictions have actually evolved their standards, right? It's come up in a very organic way. I think this is a very important moment for there to be continuous dialogue exchanges, sharing of experiences to harmonize the standards. And just, I think a week ago, right, ISSB, this is the International Sustainable Standards Body, actually put together and consolidate sustainability standards so that businesses will have one frame of reference and not have to work through too many frameworks because that increases the cost of business. So if countries can continue to collaborate, exchange ideas, harmonize standards, I think that would actually smoothen and accelerate the transition for business activity.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Wei.
Appreciate it.